Okay, let's move on with our European Parliament, and then let's link all these institutions together before we move on to other institutions. It was introduced, as I said, the European Parliament was introduced during negotiations in the very, very beginning on the treaty as an institution which would counterbalance and monitor basically the executive power of the other institutions, while it tries to aim for democratic legitimacy. And if you look at, there are a couple of things that I didn't mention in the previous hour and I would like to mention, just to give you some numerical numbers about which states are represented with how many members of the European Parliament. So if you look, the highest number, as you can guess, is Germany with 99 seats, which is followed by the United Kingdom, 73, and France, 74, and Italy, 73, like almost the same. So when you think about the size of the population of the country, it is more or less representing the seats. And don't think about it as a mathematical number. Some countries are represented in a more positive way, and some countries are represented in a more negative way, like more in advantages and disadvantages, because this is how it is. Malta, as we keep on discussing about Malta, is represented by 6 seats. And Slovenia 8, Cyprus 6, Latvia 9, Estonia 6. So when you think about it, Estonia and Malta have the same number of seats. So actually Malta should have had less in theory, or Cyprus as well should have had less, but I think they decided to keep it as a minimum like 6 seats. If you have less than 6, it doesn't necessarily make a significance. I don't know what was the calculation, because these issues are discussed, negotiated, calculated, and decided in the intergovernmental conferences. The intergovernmental conferences are the intergovernmental settings where member states' representatives come together and they decide on issues that will be reflected in the next treaty. So every treaty will have an intergovernmental conference previously, apart from the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty had a much longer process as the Laeken Declaration, even longer process that involved different member states to come up with a treaty that will be acceptable for every single one of the members. So it just gives you a general idea from 99 till 6. So that's the range. And in the break, there were some questions regarding the composition and the functioning of the European Parliament. The Parliament has parliamentary committees, as any national parliament would have. And just to give you some general idea, the European Parliament has standing committees. So standing committees are like, they're fixed committees. But depending on if the situation arises, they might also make another committee that will be dealing specifically for that issue. But the standing committees are like this. Committee on Foreign Affairs, as expected. Committee on Development, International Trade, Budgets, Budgetary Control, Economic and Monetary Affairs, Employment and Social Affairs, Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, Industry, Research, Energy, Internal Market, Transport and Tourism, Regional Development, Agriculture and Rural Development, Fisheries, Culture and Education, Legal Affairs, Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, Consultative Affairs, Women's Rights and Gender Equality, and Committee on Petitions. There's also a special committee on organized crime, corruption, and money laundering. And they have delegations, European Parliament delegations, and they have their chairs, and there's even a chair that works on EU and Turkey. Helena Flotter from Greens, from France, is dealing with that issue. And these usually delegations are for different regions, as you can imagine, like the Arab Peninsula, Americas, Asia-Pacific, Africa, Maghreb region. So it just gives you a general idea. This time I'm going to give it from this side. So let's be more than So you can have a look. So that's the general organizational structure and the power of how the European Parliament functions. And regarding the questions that can arise during the meetings, obviously, when you think about it, when a candidate arises, what happens is that if they're elected and they become part of the European Parliament, normally they should not be representing their members' interest, member state interests, so that they're not representing their nationality, basically. So they should come under these different groupings, these committees that I mentioned to you, and depending on the legislation and that, depending on the subject, they prepare reports, opinions, etc. And this is how they function. So they raise the voice of the European citizens, basically, on a particular topic. And how it works is that it's not as straightforward as it sounds, because there are other interest groups and other groups that like to raise their voices as well. And usually the European Parliament works in close cooperation, close relation with those groups and interests, like lobby groups, NGOs. If they would like to raise a certain point, they usually have close cooperation and collaboration with MEPs in the European Parliament. And the European Parliament then in that respect becomes a hub of these relationships. It's a very interesting and multi-level setting, which includes different political ideas, lobby groups, NGOs, think tank representatives, member state representatives. There is also other EU institution representatives. There are delegations of the member states who are coming and talking to certain MEPs in order to raise a certain issue from one way or to the other, or to bring it for discussion in the European Parliament, or to keep it up in the agenda, to keep it in the general attention of the European Parliament, or to raise their voices in Europe in general. And although they don't have the right to initiate legislation, the European Parliament can actually raise a certain issue that an act or a draft legislation can be prepared at the European Commission level. So it's possible that they can propose a certain legislation to be prepared. They can say that there's a need about a certain legislation about this and that, a specific topic, that you have to, prepare a legislation on that topic. Let's say about consumer protection about something, or some environmental issue, and something relates to, I don't know, energy politics, like green energy, for example, climate change, this and that. And they can also push for certain issues to be discussed and a certain legislation that has to be passed, and they can also propose that. They cannot initiate it, but it doesn't mean that they don't have any power to push for certain issues to become a bit more on the agenda, basically. So, this is a theoretical discussion about the European Parliament. And let's have a look how these three major institutions actually function all together. So we looked at the European Commission. And the European Commission will represent the EU interest, supranational, and it drafts legislation. And it works with the president, a college of commissioners, and every commissioner, as you will remember, will represent in each member state, and they will have a certain policy area that they have to promote, or policy areas, they have portfolios, and there are DGs working underneath them, and there are bureaucrats or Eurocrats, as we call them, who are working all together. And they're the technical part of the EU, basically. That's the Commission. And on the other hand, There is the Council of the EU, or the Council in short. It represents the member state interests. It is intergovernmental. And what they do is they work together with the European Parliament in order to accept, amend a draft legislation or draft act that has been proposed by the European Commission. And they had a very complicated, remember that was the most, unclear of all of the EU institutions. And unclear in the sense that it's a bit opaque, it's a bit vague, because it has a very complicated institutional structure as well. And there is organization at the ministerial level, depending on the different subject matter of the meeting that they came together. Different ministers from different member states will come together. But because not everything can be solved at the ministerial level, they also have a permanent representation system that is established. And that was the COREPER system. And the COREPER system was the Committee of Permanent Representatives. And this Committee of the Permanent Representatives are the representatives of the member states that are appointed to represent that specific member state in Brussels at the council level, right? So these representatives are actually living in Brussels at the council, not at the council physically, they're living at the council. But what I'm trying to say is that they're appointed and they're working there for a longer period of time, which basically, as it's called, they live, they eat, and they socialize in Brussels. So they know people, they know contacts, they know how things work in Brussels, basically. So, and where the issues are solved, it's usually at the COREPER level. And they also have working groups, this and that. I'm not going to repeat every single thing that I discussed in the previous classes, but let's try to paint a bigger picture. So now we have the European Parliament. Or in short, EP. It also represents the EU interests. When I say it represents the EU interest, as you all saw, there are different political groupings, transnational political groupings, so there might be some people who are not really supporting the EU integration process either. So that's a supranational body. And there are transnational party groupings. Transnational party groupings, not in theory representing certain member state interests, but basically promoting certain ideas or certain objectives. So they are clustered around those ideas or those objectives or those ideologies. So let's say in the current system that Turkey becomes a member of the European Union, the political groupings, in terms of, let's say, we will also have, let's say, 80 MEPs that we will be sending to the European Parliament because of Turkey's size in terms of population. It's probably going to be closer to Germany, but not as much as Germany, but very close to Germany. Let's say 80, 85 member MEPs will be sent. It's probably going to be representing whatever is the political situation right now in Turkey. There will be some people who would be more center-right, center-left, nationalist, and more left-wing, basically. And there will be some independent MEPs probably as well. So they will be, hypothetical situation, when they go to the European Parliament, they will be set into those political groupings. So they will be in the Christian Democrats, they will be in the group of the Social Democrats, there will be, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That's the situation. So that's the ideology. Like if you're declaring yourself to be in the center-right, that's the political party grouping. Center-left, that's the political party grouping. You might not be agreeing with everything, but that's the parliament. So that's why you should be negotiating. That's the place to be. That's why it's very interesting to see that there are even anti-EU people. Some people argue that this is very ironic or this is being two-faced. On one hand, you're getting your salary from the whole European integration process and you're against it. But some people might also argue that that's the way it is in a democracy. It's the environment you can just bring your ideas and discuss. You can just say, if let's say that I'm an anti-EU person and I'm a Eurosceptic, and it's the environment that I should be discussing. Because of this, and this reasons, I'm against this whole project. Or there are these issues which I think are working against Europe. Or these are the issues that I think that they're working against, I don't know, my member state or my political idea, this and that. So that's the environment you should be able to discuss. So in another way, it's actually a very healthy process. That it is done within the EU itself, that if there are valid criticisms about this whole EU integration process, it's the place to be discussed. And that's what a democracy is all about. It's not only the political majority who's expressing itself, but the political minority who's able to express itself. Because at the end of the day, like democracy is finding the common ground. Finding the common ground of all these people's interests to be represented and find the common ground to govern, to rule, to live together. So that's why, although we see that there is a certain percentage of people who are Eurosceptics, it's also a healthy thing that they're actually in the European Parliament, they're expressing themselves, and maybe it will bring the European integration to a better place because of that. Because if they can raise their voices or their points validly, and if they can get attention, then they maybe whatever is missing or whatever it's not working properly can be corrected. Or maybe there's another alternative process that will come out of this. Who knows? But at this moment, they're still the minority. But over time, we will see what's going to happen in the next elections. But what we see in general, in Europe in general, there is a loss of interest in the European Parliament elections. Well, it's obvious. As I said, it might be because of the reason why there's a general loss of interest in politics in Europe. Young people are not interested in politics. We are a very political nation. We like politics, like we love it. We adore politics. We can't live without politics. I've never seen a couple of people coming together and discussing about general stuff, let's say this and that, football or art, music, and after 15 minutes it comes into politics. Never seen that, especially if you're a Turkish person living abroad. That has to come to a point that you have to, save the country, as we say it. Memleketi kurtarmak meselesine gelir mutlaka. But it's not the case in Europe, in general. Looks like it. People are political. People are not really interested in politics, apart from certain countries. I have to, how about Italy?
It depends on the...
Berlusconi? That's more interesting.
But tell you one of my best friends that is completely addicted to Greece. She can speak for 5 hours in a day about Greece, so it depends on the background, of course.
But Italy is a bit more closer to Turkey in that sense. Italy is like the Mediterranean hot blood kind of nation, and you have Berlusconi. You had Berlusconi, who was also a very interesting, colorful figure as well. And obviously, how can you not talk about him? He always gives something to people to talk about. So it's in a way sad that he is gone. It's less colorful. Now we don't hear about Italy that often any longer. But what in general is that, so if you're not interested in politics at home, why should you be interested in politics in the EU, in Brussels, in Belgium, somewhere, so at the EU level? So you don't really have the motivation. And if you think that the European Parliament is not doing much, doesn't have power, so it doesn't matter, it's not worth my time and effort trying to vote, even though it's being made nowadays very easy for you to vote. And everything is done so that it's so easy for you to vote, that it's not going to be complicated. So that's why sometimes it's the symbolic value that the introduction of the European citizenship that is very critical, because then it promotes certain values, certain ideas, certain ideologies for the European citizens to embrace this whole idea about the European integration process, this project that is actually for the citizen. When you think about it, in 1957, the whole reason why the whole process came into being is not about Brussels or Commission or this and that weird Codecision procedure, blah, blah, blah, all the things that we're now technically discussing. The whole idea was, it was a peace project. That's why it got the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Because it successfully actually achieved peace in the last like 50-something years, and we look back. It was about creating peace, stability, and prosperity within the continent. And you might agree, I mean, whether or not it achieved, if you look at the Balkans, that we had major crises in the Balkans. But apart from that, for the other member states that were actually fighting with each other, no longer are fighting with each other. They're even using a common currency. So some of the political objectives have been successfully achieved. But this, obviously, was not explained to the European citizen very well. So if you look at it, if you look at the rising Euroscepticism, the no votes about the European Constitution, the name even suggested that we are giving you rights. There is a Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's on the preamble of this treaty. Before, these rights were embedded in certain doctrines or principles of the European Union law, and the ECJ was protecting it. But we no longer need this indirect protection. We're now listing those rights for you. These are your rights. And this whole process, this peace process, is now trying to become a full democratic process, because we are promoting these values and principles, not for people who are third country nationals somewhere else in the world, for trade agreements, this and that, enlargement, but we are doing it for you. This whole EU project is actually for you. So this was not successfully, obviously, explained. I mean, it doesn't look like it. There's this much skepticism. That's why there has been a continuous public relations campaign of the EU right now, but the whole Erasmus program is part of it as well. You go and have an experience in a different country, you get training from another country, all these benefits. That's why you have one passport, you can travel from one country to the other. If you want to work, you can live in another country of the EU if you're an EU citizen, work in another country, retire in another country, do whatever you want. I mean, within the framework of law and order and this and that, obviously. But you have those rights. Before, it was not possible. But this has to be, in that sense, reflected to the citizen, and the citizen should be able to understand it much better. So going back with this relationship with this three major institutions who have critical role in drafting, preparing, and at the same time accepting legislation and acts of within the EU. The Commission is a technical body, as I said. They have the technical expertise, and they prepare the legislation, so they propose. Previously, they were only proposing it the Council of the European Union. But now, when they propose, they're proposing it jointly with the Council and the European Parliament. And when they're going to dispose, they have to dispose this legislation that's been proposed together. in order to put in that this co-decision procedure, all this, graphs that we've seen and we've shown, in order to put it very simply, this is how it happens. So, Council and the European Parliament act together, find a way, either not efficiently, or efficiently, or long, in a long period of time, or a short period of time, but at the end, they either accept or amend and or reject this proposal together. So that's the co-decision. And the role of the European Parliament then became more and more critical and more important through this process of deciding on how the EU actually is run, basically. So the role of the European Parliament means that when it's increased, the authority or the power of the European citizens or the control of the European citizens on the whole European integration project has increased as well. There's one other thing that the European Parliament has, and I forgot to mention. They also approve, we mentioned before with the Commission, if you remember, they also approve or reject the Commission President and the College of Commissioners. Remember? They have to give the vote of confidence to the College of Commissioners. So they also have that power and role. So in a way, they're able to, in that sense, influence the European Commission, at least in the first appointment of the President and the College of Commissioners. And if there is a case that, or there is a suspicion that one of the commissioners, or the whole College of Commissioners, are involved in maladministration, or corruption, or this and that, they can also bring the issue to the attention of the President of the Commission. So not because just you've been appointed and then you get the vote of confidence doesn't mean that you're automatically free of any kind of, in that sense, scrutiny till the end of your period. Obviously, European Parliament also has to make sure that that power has been used in order. So they also have that kind of rule, in addition to their budgetary role to accept the budget as well. So this is the general picture. And what are the other EU institutions that we're going to be talking about? There's one other institution that we're not discussing right now. It's after the midterm. But it's the European Court of Justice. ECJ in other words. It's also a supranational institution. So it also looks for the EU interest, make sure that the EU law is being implemented uniformly in every single member state. All the treaties are implemented according to their intent, and this and that. And this is the highest court of the European Union. Like if you think about it, if you have to compare, then we can compare it as like a constitutional court. So to make sure that everything is in order in the EU law in terms of the EU treaties and the acquis, etc. And they're a very interesting institution, and we're going to be covering it a bit more in detail, because in the sense that they have an activism. So they actually over time acted a bit beyond their original power or intention, which is called the judicial activism of the European Court of Justice. So they kind of moved a bit step forward in terms of what was defined for them in the beginning, in the early beginning of the whole European integration process. But it kind of pushed the European integration a bit further in the 1960s because of the cases that they decided. So these are the four major institutions, basically. The judicial branch, the legislative and the executive branches. And then let's move on and let's have a look on the other EU institutions. The other EU institutions, let's continue with the courts. The There is the court of first instance. As the name suggests, it's a court. It's if you have to compare it, it's like a court of like a more dealing with more issues related to the competition cases, European coal and steel community cases, staff cases, and claims for damages. Which means that with the European Court of Justice being established, and over time, the case law has increased drastically on the Court of Justice. And at some point, the court couldn't deal with the case load. It was the cases were taking too long, too many cases, and they have to differentiate. They have to make a kind of a division of labor. So they established the Court of First Instance for dealing with certain specific type of cases, so that the workload of the Court of Justice will be more specific, and it will be dealing, so that there will be a specific division of labor in terms of functions. So in order to help the European Court of Justice. So these cases are like staff cases. For example, if you're working in the European Commission, you're going to retire, and there has been a miscalculation of your retirement time, this and that. You're not going to go to the European Court of Justice. You will come to the European Court of First Instance. Or there might be claims for damages from different EU institutions. That's going to be the court that you will bring your case. Or there are some more straightforward competition cases, and that will be the court as well. So to attach to the Court of Justice a court with jurisdiction to hear certain cases and determine them at first instance. So make things more efficient, more effective, and more rapid, basically. That was the duty. There is another institution which has a name of a court. Court of Auditors. But this is not a court. It has the name of a court, but this is not a court. It looks at, it's not a judicial court in a sense. It only examines the EU's financial affairs. So in Turkish, any ideas what it would be? The same kind of institution? Sayıştay, right? In Sayıştay, it also looks into the books of state institutions. I mean, every institution has a budget. As a state institution, our university has a budget, and there's a certain allocated budget, and it has to be spent accordingly. But everything has to be spent according to the books, according to the rules and the regulations of the university operates. So Sayıştay will look into the books and has to make sure that the money that has been allocated for a certain purpose, let's say to pay the electricity bill, is actually used to pay the electricity bill. That money is not used, I don't know, to buy books. And then at the end of the day, we cannot pay the electricity bill because we spend the money on paying books. So this is what Sayıştay does, Council of State in Turkey. So it's what the Court of Auditors do at the EU level. So it looks at all institutions, all payments made before the year's accounts are closed. So before the year's accounts are closed, they look into the books, and they have to make sure that the money has been spent according to the rules and regulations. With the Treaty of the European Union, it elevated the body to become as equal as other institutions. And they also fight against fraud and empowerment as, like with all these member states sending representatives to the Court of Auditors as well. So it's also, in that sense, a technical body, but not necessarily a court. So don't get confused with its name. So European, next institution. The European Economic and Social Committee. It's a consultative or like advisory institution, consists of representatives of workers, employers, and professional and consumer organizations. They're appointed for 4 years, and their function is to give advice or to prepare reports on the recommendation of national governments, and they meet in plenary sessions 10 times a year or more frequently in smaller groupings. And its purpose to advise the Commission, the Council, the European Parliament on social and economic issues, as the name suggests. So when they're consulted, they give opinions regarding certain political topics, and if there is a draft legislation that's being prepared, that's what they do. They prepare their opinions, which will look into the economic and social impact of that draft legislation. And they give advice to these institutions, the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament. Not only Commission. I just give the example if the Commission is preparing a legislation. But it's not only limited to the Commission. It can be the European Parliament might be asking also the consultation, or the Council of the European Union as well. So the aim is actually to involve all these different kind of interests. I listed you the whole different types of organizations that are being represented. So they try to show the democratic accountability, to make the EU more democratically accountable, to involve these various representations. So in the decision making, and in order to make it more transparent as well. So when the Commission is preparing and drafting the legislation, so they are asking all these representatives as well their opinion about a certain point of view. So it becomes the whole decision-making process more open and more transparent. So more open to the citizens as well, and different kind of interests are represented when a certain legislation or act or policy is being developed in that sense. So it also involves different levels as well. It involves the workers, it involves also the business employers and professional or consumer groups. So it's not only one-sided. So it's trying to get opinions from different representatives, as you can imagine. So on one hand the consumer, on the other hand the worker, on the other hand the employer. So you're trying to bring different points of view together when you're preparing your own policy. There is another one, similar function, Committee of Regions. If you see this, that's what it means. Committee of Regions is a similar kind of committee. And it's the involvement of local and regional representatives. In the EU, the local and regional representation is very critical. It's a pan-European body that sought a formal role in the European Union affairs, and all these members who are in the Committee of Regions also proposed by the national governments, and the aim is to give regions and localities a greater voice in the entire EU system. So they're also trying to make it a bit more democratic system, more transparent. So they're trying to empower the local regional organization as well. So their representation is to give them a voice, basically, of the regions. But there are different attitudes by different member states, as you can imagine, because there are different political systems and there are different political issues in each and every member state. So some member states are more keen about this representation than the others. Some of them have a more, like the unitary member states, more like nation states, have little or no interest in the Committee of Regions. But some of them, who are more federal kind of systems, have more of interest, as you can imagine, because in their cases, in their political system, in their political and governance system, the regions and the local representation is far more critical. And some members, many members of the committee have a double agenda. What does that mean? They have the agenda in the sense that on the one hand, they would like to carry out their functions as they're attributed. in the treaties and advance regionalism in their country. So on the one hand, they try to do whatever they need to do and the committee, but at the same time, some of the representatives will be trying to promote their regional interests within this setting as well. National and regional can sometimes clash, or they can come together depending on the situation. It's also a platform of propaganda for regional autonomy. So that can be a platform of propaganda, or even independence. And this has been the case we recently see very often in the EU setting, like in the Scottish referendum, for example. Same thing in various other member states as well, who have different, ethnic groups or regional groups, etc. So we can see that regionalism and supranationalism usually complement rather than conflict with each other. This is what we can see from this setting. So in that sense, we can say that we can conclude that the supranational institutions and the regional authorities share a common point of view, which they are actually a bit skeptical about the national authorities. Both supranational and subnational, they are both very skeptical about the national governments. I mean, you don't have to know they have 5 plenary sessions each year. You don't have to remember all these things. You just have to remember the general setting, what they do, how they function, what's the main purpose of them. So let's move on then. The other 3 institutions we're going to be covering. Let's go through the subject matter. Oh. The European Ombudsman. Any ideas what it does? Sorry? Yes, what does it do?
There is an investigation about the work of other institutions.
What kind of works? Are they congratulating them? Well done. Amazing work. So they actually investigate maladministration usually. If there has been misuse, this and that, if there's a complaint, basically. The same thing, now we recently have an ombudsman as well. The Turkish citizens can also go and make a complaint. I don't know if any one of you complained about anything so far. I haven't. So I don't really necessarily know the process. Maybe I should and see how it works. But we have that system. It tries to make it a bit more democratic and very close to the citizen. So you basically, as a citizen, you know that if there's an issue that has to be raised, that you can directly go to a place and you know where to go. And as an ordinary citizen, it's not like going to a court or suing and that you need a lawyer, this and that. It tries to make it a bit simpler, more straightforward. So getting rid of all the barriers between you and the public administration for you to be able to raise your voice. That's the whole idea. So Ombudsman cannot penalize any offenders. It can, but that's not the court. So keep it in mind. It can investigate. It can raise the issue. Its only, right is to readdress. It's to forward a critical report to the Parliament and to the institution against which the complaint is made. So it's basically trying to make that the issue gets attention. So raising the issue to the European Parliament, preparing a report that it should be the European Parliament who has representation of the European citizens to move forward with that action against that institution, this and that. So that's the whole point. So as I said, it's all in the same idea that the EU should become more democratic and closer to the citizen. So it's trying to bring the EU closer to the citizen. That's the whole idea. And the last 2 institutions, the European Central Bank, which is located in Frankfurt, And it's the bank that ensures price stability within the Eurozone, basically. It's part of the European systems of central banks. After TEU, Treaty of the European Union, it established the European Union and the European Monetary Union, as you will remember. It was proposed by that. The primary function is price stability within the Eurozone. And what does price stability mean? And it is also responsible from the monetary policy and foreign exchange operations and management of reserves of the countries participating in the single currency. What does that mean if you're not an economist? So, if you think about it, it's a bank that is autonomous. So it is outside the influence of the member states. Why? It has to be, otherwise there can be a conflict of interest. Some states might be forcing, I'm not feeling, in terms of this monetary reasons, could you please push the interest rates a bit higher or lower, this and that. So that's why it should be autonomous. And the price stability means that the prices do not fluctuate constantly within the Eurozone. What happens if they fluctuate constantly within the Eurozone? There is no price stability. The prices fluctuate, which means that inflation will be high and low and this and that. And if that's the case, so the euro as a currency is not going to be a stable currency. So for the countries who would like to keep euro as a reserve currency, will not be able to trust euro as a stable currency and keep in their reserves. So that was the whole idea about establishing a currency that will be respected and that's going to be accepted as a credible currency, stable currency in general. I don't want to say it's a rival, but in a sense a competitor to dollar, for example. And price stability is achieved through the control of what? Any ideas? How can you create price stability? Inflation, somebody said inflation, exactly. Because if the prices don't change, let's say the prices of computers keep stable in the next 4 or 5 years. Sounds good, isn't it? Prices are not increasing. So how can you do that? How can you make sure that the prices don't increase? So there is no inflation then. If you keep the inflation very, very low, the prices will go up very, very slowly. And how can you keep inflation low? Try to remember economics, demand and supply. Sorry, tell me again. You can control the money supply. We see an economist among us, yes. And how do you do that?
If you increase money supply, inflation will be higher.
But how do you control the supply of money?
Printing money, like
printing money, but also
government expenditure.
Yeah, in a way. There are different mechanisms, but sorry?
Open market operations.
Open market operations. But there is one very important tool that the central banks usually use. Interest rate, exactly. So if you keep the interest rate high, the banks will give very high interest rates, and the central bank will say, this is the interest rate that we're proposing. So other banks will be adopting that interest rate as well. So accordingly, what will happen is that if there's a very high interest rate, people who have savings would like to put the money into the bank. So there will be less money in the market which is circulating. Less money means less people buying stuff. If there are less people buying stuff, somebody is sleeping, less people, economy, it's very critical though, affects all of us. Less money is circulating and the prices will be kept more stable, so less inflation basically. It's a demand and supply thing. More people are interested in buying stuff, the prices will go up accordingly. The basic supply and demand. You look confused, incredibly confused. Let's say that I'm selling this chalk Anybody who's going to give me 10 liras? How about one? Half a lira? So there is no demand for my chalk. Nobody wants to buy the chalk, right? So there is no demand, the prices will go down. But let's say I'm selling more, I don't have anything. Let's say that I'm selling the laptop for 10 liras. Anybody's buying? There will be lots of people interested in buying. So I'm not going to be selling it for 10 liras because I can actually sell it much higher. I'm pretty sure there will be somebody here for this laptop that you would be willing to pay 100 liras. So that's the basic rule of economics, basically. There is demand and supply. There is more demand, then the prices will go higher. And if there is less demand, the prices will go down. Same thing is applied on money. Less money around, and there will be less people who are buying stuff. So controlling the interest rate, you can keep the inflation in control. But obviously, it's not as simple as it sounds. I mean, this is not like that. There are 10,000 different, variables included in that. But in order to simplify it, this is what the European Central Bank tries to do. Tries to control the interest rate and the monetary policy so that there is price stability within the Eurozone, that there is not these high fluctuations. Because why? All these economies are interrelated. They're connected. They're using the single currency. They're using a single money. If that money is stable, good for all of them. And if one country is doing a terrible job in keeping up with the homeworks, basically, if one country is going down, as we've seen in the last couple of years, then it means that the whole system will go down. So that's why all these rescue plans and this and that. It's also a prestige thing, because as I said, they would like to keep euro as a stable and reliable currency. They don't want to diminish its value either. So it's a matter of symbolic value, political value, economic and monetary value as well, the financial value. So many things combined together. So that's why it's very critical. And that's what the European Central Bank does in a nutshell. I mean, I'm simplifying it enormously here. So obviously, I think the European Central Bank officials are like listening to me right now. This is not what we do, but this is in a short version what they do. And the final one is also a bank. European Investment Bank, as the name suggests, it tries to encourage more investment within the European Union. It's an autonomous financial body within the EU and seeks to promote economic development in the EU by offering loans. So it gets money from the member states, and then it gives loans to public and private sector, like small and medium-sized enterprises, or, for example, regional governments, in order to promote the economic development and prosperity. And it's guaranteeing loans from other financial institutions as well. I mean, it has to get some money from somewhere to be able to distribute the money. So you have to make sure that the money is coming from somewhere, and then it has to be distributed. And EU member states are also shareholders, depending on their economic weight. So it's like supporting, basically, like KOBİ'ler, yerel yönetimler vesaire. So in order to make sure that the regional development is supported, either through private or public. So they don't make that differentiation. Not only they're giving it to public, but they're also giving to private. But mostly, as I said, the small and medium-sized enterprises. So with that, I mean, there are other consultative, very specialized institutions. There are like more than like 40, 50 of them. But we're not going into detail. These are the major ones. The very big, the big brothers over here. I don't want to say that they're the small brothers, but at least for the context of this course, for the scope, we're not really looking into too much in detail, but I just want you to have a general idea about who they are, what they do, what kind of a role they have. But these are the major institutions that our focus is on. Yeah.
Can we also talk about the European Council
European Council, yes, we skipped that, right? I mean, I used it as a stepdaughter, stepson. There's also European Council, which is accepted as a formal institution by the Lisbon Treaty. Previously, it was not accepted as a formal institution, and now it is. Its secretariat is based basically within the Council of the EU. They're all in Brussels. So B refers to Brussels. B, and ENS Strasbourg. Like Luxembourg here. It's a summit, and it's the summit which brings the heads of states and heads of governments together, depending on the political organization or the governance of the member state, obviously. And they meet every 6 months, mostly in around December and around June time, and sometimes informally another 2 times. And they have different member states through the rotating system. They have the presidency, so every 6 months. It gives the possibility for smaller, usually member states, to raise their voices within the EU system. And in their presidency, they can actually, put certain issues on top of the priority or on top of the EU agenda, and they can promote certain objectives depending on their priorities, this and that. They usually come up with a list or agenda. In my presidency, let's say Latvia will be promoting women's rights, clean environment, green, energy solutions, this and that. Those are the topics that I will try to push during my presidency. Those are the topics that I will try to make sure that the member states take on their top of their agenda, so that more legislation or proposals or policies will be developed in this line of objectives, basically. And it's because it's every 6 months, it's rotating to a different member states. They try to establish like a kind of a 18-month period where the previous presidency, the current presidency, and the future presidency, the prospective presidency, they work together so that these ideas that have been promoted with the previous presidency are also held forward, so that there is not going to be a disruption about every 6 months. So there is going to be a continuum on those policies. And they come together and they decide on, in this council, European Council meetings with their heads of governments and heads of states, they come together and they decide on major issues that will be shaping the European integration. Which means, like, there's going to be another enlargement. Which member states are going to be accepted? Or whether or not, let's do something against what is happening on ISIS. Well, that's like major issues. Or are we going to have a treaty, a new treaty? How are we going to have this new treaty? This and that. So the major issues that are actually shaping the pace of integration, the direction of integration, the scope of integration, these are the summits that they come together. And it's an opportunity for those heads of states to come together and discuss and settle issues as well. So it's an opportunity. It's basically a summit, although it's considered as an institution. Still as a summit, but it has a permanent secretariat. Now it's being held, as I said, in the Council of the EU. As a summary, that's what I could say. Any more questions? Doğru mu çelik? You finished earlier? How could it be possible? Okay then. The president is Barroso, President Rompuy, doesn't have a super critical role. As I said, he is just like a spokesperson, basically. Rompuy is representing the Council of the EU. He's also going to be represented in the European Council. And President Barroso is also represented in the European Council. And also, his vice president is Mrs. CFSP, which is patronatural.
It's not international.
Kim olmuş?
Frederica.
Frederica yazalım o zaman. Söyle ne? Google'dan bakın da yanlış bir şey yapmayın. Mrs. CFSP diyelim. At the end of the day, she's the vice president. This is also relates to the institutional and political development of the European integration. What does that mean? You are with the, I mean, I didn't write down all the treaties now. With the Treaty of the European Union, you're trying to sign that to European Union. It's a union. It's not a community any longer. It's a union, which means that we are closer together. We are more integrated together. It's a deepened integration we're talking about. In the previous class, I made a huge map of US versus France, where we discussed about federalism versus the nation state and how these things work actually. Just because you're changing a name doesn't mean that you just change a name by randomly. Those things are usually representing the political changes within the whole system itself. So if you have the Treaty of the European Union establishing the union, and you are involved in the European Monetary Union, for example, so in the monetary matters, you're saying that this union is responsible. On the foreign and security policy matters, this union is also responsible. I mean, the name suggests a common foreign and security policy. This policy is not common at all, by the way. That's a different discussion. But it shows an intention. We want this policy to be common for all of us, because of various needs, because of symbolism, because of political reasons, because of the needs, because of the Balkan crisis, this and that. It's not always idealistic reasons that they come up with certain, sometimes it's pragmatic reasons. Things are happening in the Balkans, we're not deciding all together, we have to have a common foreign and security policy. But at the same time, what makes a state is that, like in the case of a federal state, like think about the US for example, in the case of the US, there's the federal law, which is applicable for all the states involved in the United States political and governance system, but there are also state laws, right? And there are certain policies which are developed within the states itself, but there are also federal policies. And one of the major issues that are common to mining for every state, let's say in the case US, is that they have US dollars. So these, like the monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, for example, in the last couple of weeks, the dollar fluctuated. Why the dollar fluctuated? Because the Federal Reserve basically tried to control to change the interest rates. That had global implications. Right? But at the end of the day, in one state, in one federal state, there's only one currency, one monetary policy that's being applied. And there's one defense policy. We cannot talk about defense policy of California, defense policy of, I don't know, Montana or North Dakota or Texas. There is the US Army and there is the US foreign policy. So defense and foreign policy is common, although there are different laws in different states. Let's take this, move it to the EU. If you look at it, what happened in the Treaty of the European Union is that they tried to develop a system that kind of resembles a federal system, one might argue. There's the European Monetary Union, the money, the currency, a common currency. Yes, and you might argue that some states agreed to be part or some states didn't agree to be part, but at the end of the day, that's the reason why they have the name change. Plus, they introduced a common foreign policy. They stepped forward in terms of that direction. I mean, they know their limitations, so they're not incredibly, idealistic that they're going to have a common foreign policy next day. But at least they say, let's baby steps, let's try, let's initiate this. So 3 major issues that are very critical for a state: the monetary policy, foreign policy, and defense and security policy, they try to develop. But over time, there are limitations that it has been developed. Very, very difficult to develop it in like big, gigantic steps. And that was the case as well. So that's why, so far, the development has been like baby steps, initial steps. There are different smaller actions, common blah, blah, blah. They try to come up with, as we see that it's not possible to talk about a foreign policy still. But at least with the Lisbon Treaty, they said there should be one person who's representing the EU in foreign policy matters. Mr. or Mrs. CFSP, their role. And we should not just give a symbolic name for a person, like before it was Javier Solana for many, many years, who was the NATO General Secretary for many, many years, a Spanish guy, very successfully fulfilled that role. But he had the name, but didn't necessarily have the authority, the power behind it. So they said, let's not just do it as a symbolic value. He should also be, or she should also be, the Vice President of the European Commission and working together with the President of the European Commission as well. So that will increase the role of the common foreign and security policy. And it will give a more, in that sense, strong message. But it also depends who has this role. It also depends what's going on around the world as well. It also depends the political stance of the member states about these issues as well. So it's not as straightforward as like we create this position, we give this role, and everything is going to be working smoothly. There are different variables included in that system as well. In Catherine Ashton's period, some people criticize her very much, saying that she didn't really have a very strong role, this and that. But the EU wasn't in its best while she was doing that issue as well. And there were various complicated issues that came arise, and it wasn't possible to talk about a very strong EU leadership during that time either. So that's the role that we're asked with. One question? Okay.